All right, let's jump right into it today. We are taking a deep dive into Active Directory.
Ooh, Active Directory.
Specifically.
The heart of any good network.
Yes, and focusing on organizational units, those all-important OUs, and how to master user management.
Yeah.
Which is a pretty key skill if you're going to be an IT administrator, right?
That's the core.
Yeah. And lucky for us for this deep dive, we have some excellent training materials. And these were specifically designed for expert IT systems and devices students. So that's who we're kind of imagining
Okay, all right.
as our audience today. But of course, anyone who's interested in Active Directory, I think will get a lot out of this deep dive. So
For sure.
what's really cool about these materials is we have a hands-on lab assignment and a theoretical lesson plan. So we get to kind of learn by doing and by understanding the concepts behind it all.
I like that. I like that approach. You know, the hands-on is always good. But having that theoretical background really helps you when you get into those why isn't this working moment.
Exactly. Yeah. It's not just enough to know which buttons to click.
Yeah.
You need to understand the why behind the how.
Exactly. Yeah. You get much better at troubleshooting.
Absolutely.
If you know why.
So let's start with the big picture here.
Yeah.
What are OUs? And why should anyone care about them?
So imagine Active Directory as a massive library.
Okay.
Right? Filled with information about every user, every computer, and every resource on the network.
Mm-hmm.
And OUs are like the different sections of that library. You know, you got your fiction section,
Sure.
you got your nonfiction section, your history section. They bring order to what could be chaos.
Oh, yeah. I see that.
Right. So if you just had one big room with all the books just thrown in there,
Oh, gosh.
it'd be a nightmare, right?
Yeah.
It'd be very difficult to find anything. You wouldn't know where to start. So OU has helped to bring some order and make it much easier to manage permissions, apply policies, and generally keep things running smoothly.
So it's all about organization, really.
Yeah.
Within that kind of, I guess, yeah, that Active Directory, that library, like you said.
Yes.
Okay. That analogy really makes sense. But how do they actually work in practice? Like the source material mentions this KISS principle.
Oh, yeah.
Keep it simple, stupid.
Yes.
Is that a hint that we shouldn't overcomplicate things?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Complexity is the enemy of good design, especially in IT. So a well-structured OU system should mirror a company's real-world organization. So think departments.
Okay.
Sales, marketing, HR. Each of those departments will probably have their own specific needs.
Right.
And their own specific access levels. So OUS let you translate that real-world structure into the digital realm of Active Directory.
Okay. So instead of managing permissions for like hundreds of individual users,
Yeah.
you can kind of apply policies at the OU level and streamline the whole process.
Exactly. It's about working smarter, not harder.
I like that. Yeah, I like that a lot. So speaking of working smarter, let's talk about the week's lab assignment.
All right.
You're tasked with creating a realistic OU structure for a fictional company called Mistral BV.
Sounds fun.
Yeah. And it looks like we're not just, creating a few basic OUs. We're actually building out the whole structure, including separate OUs for things like workstations.
Right.
Why is that level of detail important?
Well, it's all about thinking about scale and future growth. Early on, it might seem easier to just lump all your computers and users into one giant OU.
Right, just throw it all in there
Yeah.
and sort it out later.
But as your network grows, that can quickly become a management nightmare.
Oh, yeah, I can imagine.
So having those separate OUs, OUs for computers, users, groups, and so on, allows you to target your policies more effectively.
It's like having different sets of rules for different parts of the library.
Yeah, exactly.
That makes perfect sense. Now, the lab also introduces this idea of delegation of control.
Yes.
Which seems pretty important, but I have to admit, the name makes me think of like handing over a boring task to someone else.
Right.
Can you explain what it really means in the context of Active Directory?
Think of it this way. In a small organization, the IT administrator might be responsible for everything.
Right.
Creating users, resetting passwords, managing permissions. But as the organization grows, that becomes unsustainable.
Right. You can't have one person doing everything.
Yeah.
You'd need an army of IT admins.
Exactly. That's where delegation of control comes in.
Right.
It lets you give specific permissions to specific people or groups without giving them full administrative control.
So instead of making everyone a super admin,
Yes.
You can give them just enough access to do their jobs.
Right. Exactly. It's a fundamental security principle.
Oh.
And the lab uses the example of Hank Binnison, a help desk employee. Instead of giving Hank full admin rights, which would be a huge security risk, you can delegate the ability for him to reset passwords or manage user groups within a specific OU.
Okay, I'm starting to see how this all ties together. We're building a system where users are organized logically,
Yes.
policies are applied efficiently, and security is maintained through a clever system of delegated permissions.
Right.
But there's one more piece of the puzzle I'm curious about. Those user objects, the lesson plan keeps mentioning.
Okay.
This is kind of mysterious. What exactly are they?
In simple terms, a user object is the digital representation of a user
Okay.
within Active Directory. It contains all the information about that user, their name, their password, their group memberships, and much more. But what makes them really interesting are these unique identifiers they have. Things like SIDs, canonical names, and UPNs.
Okay, now you're getting into the really technical stuff.
Yeah.
Could you break down those cryptic identifiers for us? What do they actually mean, and why are they important?
Each one plays a crucial role in how Active Directory works. Think of the SID, or security identifier, as a digital fingerprint.
Okay.
It's unique to each user, and it's used behind the scenes for access control. The canonical name is a bit like the user's internal address within the domain,
Okay.
helping the system to locate them within a complex network structure. And then we have the UPN, or user principal name, which is the user's login name, usually in that familiar username at domain format.
Right.
It's what they actually use to log into their computers and access resources.
Okay, so even if two users have the same username, their SIDs and canonical names would be different, ensuring that they're treated as distinct entities by the system.
Exactly. It's all about maintaining security and avoiding confusion.
Right. Okay, I think I'm starting to get a handle on these user objects.
Okay.
They're not just containers for information. They're complex entities.
Yes.
With their own unique identities and properties.
Uh-huh.
But why should we care about all these technical details?
Wow.
What practical difference do they make in our day-to-day work with Active Directory?
Understanding these identifiers is crucial for troubleshooting.
Okay.
For example, if a user can't log in, knowing about SIDs and UPNs can help you pinpoint the source of the problem. Is it a password issue?
Okay.
Is the UPN correct? Is there a conflict with another user's SID?
So it's like having a deeper understanding of the inner workings of a car engine.
Yes. Yeah.
It might not be essential for everyday driving.
Right.
But if something goes wrong, you can diagnose the problem more effectively.
Exactly. The more you understand these underlying concepts, the more confident you'll be in troubleshooting and managing your Active Directory environment.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Now that we've kind of explored the why behind Active Directory and OUs,
Yeah.
let's roll up our sleeves and dive into that Mistral BV Lab assignment. Remember, you're tasked with building a realistic OU structure for this fictional company.
All right, this is where the rubber meets the road.
Yes.
We've talked about the theory, now it's time to put it into practice.
Exactly.
But before we jump into the specifics of the lab, can we take a step back and talk about the general approach to designing an OU structure?
Sure. Right.
Where do we even begin?
Well, a good starting point is to think about the company's organizational chart.
Okay.
How are the departments structured?
Right.
Are there any branch offices or remote teams?
So if Mistral BV has a sales department, a marketing department, an HR department,
Yep.
those would likely become top-level OUs.
Exactly. You're mirroring the real-world structure in the
Yeah.
digital world.
Right. And don't forget about those separate OUs for computers and groups and other objects.
Yes. Yes. Very important.
Yeah, it's essential for applying policies and permissions effectively. The lab specifically mentions creating those separate OUs. It feels almost intuitive now that we've talked about the why behind it.
It's like organizing a toolbox.
Okay.
You wouldn't just throw all your tools in a pile, would you?
No.
You'd have separate compartments for screwdrivers and wrenches and hammers and so on.
Right.
Makes everything easier to find and use.
I like that analogy. It makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
So we've got our main OUs for the departments, our separate OUs for computers and groups. What else do we need to consider?
Think about the users themselves.
Yeah.
Where do they fit into the structure?
Mm-hmm.
The lab has you create a user account for Hank Jansen,
Right.
a help desk employee.
Mm-hmm.
Where would you place him in the OU structure?
Well, Assuming Mistral BV has an IT or help desk department,
Yep.
Hank would logically go under that OU.
Exactly. It's all about placing things where they belong.
Okay.
And once you've placed Hank in the right OU,
Right.
you can start thinking about group memberships. The lab has you create a global security group for help desk meet workers and add Hank to that group.
Ah. So we're starting to see how groups fit into the picture. It's not just about organizing users.
Right.
It's about grouping them based on their roles and responsibilities.
Yes.
This must be where delegation of control comes into play.
You got it. Once you have your group set up,
Yeah.
you can start delegating specific permissions to them.
Okay.
Remember, we don't want to give Hank full administrative rights.
Right.
That would be a major security risk.
Yeah. Huge risk.
Instead, we want to give him just enough access to do his job effectively.
So in Hank's case, we might give him permission to reset passwords
Yep.
for users within the help desk OU,
Uh-huh.
but not for users in other departments.
Precisely. That's the power of delegation of control.
Okay.
It allows you to fine-tune permissions, minimizing risk, while still empowering people to do their jobs.
I like that. I like that a lot.
And speaking of user management, the lesson plan goes into some detail about best practices for user accounts.
Oh, this is the kind of practical advice I was hoping for.
Right.
What are some of the key takeaways?
One of the most important best practices is to use groups to streamline permissions. Instead of assigning permissions to individual users,
Right.
which can be a nightmare to manage,
Oh, yeah.
you assign permissions to groups.
Right. That's way more efficient.
Yes.
If everyone in the marketing department needs access to a shared folder, you just give the marketing group permission to that folder, and everyone in the group automatically inherits that permission.
Exactly. It saves time and reduces the risk of errors.
Much better. Much better.
Another important best practice is to establish consistent naming conventions for user accounts.
This is where we always use something like first name dot last name for usernames. Right?
Exactly.
Okay. It seems like a small thing.
Yeah.
But it makes a huge difference in terms of organization and clarity.
Imagine trying to find a specific user account in a directory with thousands of entries,
Oh, God.
all with inconsistent naming conventions.
Yeah. It would be like searching for a needle in a haystack.
And speaking of needles and haystacks,
Okay.
I'm curious about those cryptic user identifiers we discussed earlier.
Yes.
SIDs, canonical names, and UPNs.
Right.
They seem really technical.
Yeah.
But the lesson plan suggests that understanding them is crucial for troubleshooting.
Absolutely. It's like having a secret decoder ring.
Yes.
You know, if a user can't log in,
Right.
for example, knowing about SIDs and UPNs can help you figure out what's going on.
Uh-huh.
Is it a password issue?
Yep.
Is there a problem with the user's profile?
Right.
Is there a conflict with another user's SID?
Exactly.
So instead of just blindly resetting passwords or creating new user accounts,
Mm-hmm.
we can use our knowledge of these identifiers
Yes.
to diagnose the problem more effectively.
Exactly. It's like being a detective.
Oh,
You're using your knowledge of the system
Right.
to gather clues and solve the mystery.
I love that analogy.
Yeah.
It makes troubleshooting feel less like a chore
Right.
and more like an intellectual challenge.
That's the right attitude.
I like that.
And speaking of challenges, let's talk about one of the most important aspects of Active Directory management. Documentation.
Oh, documentation. Not always the most exciting topic.
Right.
But I know it's important.
It is.
What kind of documentation should we be thinking about in the context of Active Directory?
Think about it this way. You've spent all this time
Right.
carefully designing your OU structure, delegating permissions,
Yeah.
setting up user accounts. What happens if you win the lottery and decide to retire tomorrow?
Well, hopefully Mistral Beatty would throw me a fantastic farewell party.
Of course.
But
Yeah.
seriously, I see your point. all that knowledge and planning would be lost
Yes.
if it wasn't documented properly.
Exactly. Good documentation is essential for knowledge transfer.
Right.
It helps to ensure continuity,
Right.
prevents errors. Yeah.
And makes it much easier for others to understand and manage the system.
So what should this documentation include?
Wow.
We're talking about detailed diagrams of the OU structure, explanations of the permission settings,
Yep.
and maybe even a list of all the user accounts and their group memberships.
All of that and more.
Oh, wow.
Think about what information would be helpful for someone who
Mhm.
needs to understand
Right.
or manage your Active Directory environment.
Okay.
Document your naming conventions, your password policies,
Uh-huh.
your backup procedures, and any other important details.
It sounds like a lot of work,
It is.
but I can see how it would be invaluable in the long run.
Absolutely.
It's like creating a user manual
Yes.
for your Active Directory system.
That's a great way to think about it.
Yeah.
And speaking of user manuals, let's talk about another crucial aspect of Active Directory management, backups.
Backups, the golden rule of IT.
Yes.
I know we need to back up our data regularly.
Yeah. But what specifically should we be backing up in the context of Active Directory?
The Active Directory database itself is the most critical component.
Okay.
It contains all the information about your users, groups, computers, and OUs.
Right.
If that database gets corrupted or lost,
No.
you're in big trouble.
Yeah, that's not good.
It would be like losing the library's card catalog.
Yeah.
You'd have all these books, but no way to find them.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
So regular backups of the Active Directory database are essential.
Okay.
You should also consider backing up your group policy objects,
Right.
which contain all those settings and permissions we've been talking about.
Okay, I'm starting to get a sense of the scope of Active Directory management. It's not just about creating users and setting passwords.
Mm-hmm.
It's about planning, organizing, delegating, documenting, and protecting your entire directory infrastructure.
You're getting it.
Okay.
And when we're just scratching the surface here,
Wow.
there's so much more to explore in the world of Active Directory.
I'm ready for more.
Right.
What's next on our agenda?
Yeah.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground, from the theory of OUs and user management to the practical steps of building an OU structure,
Yeah.
delegating permissions, really getting into the nuts and bolts of it all. But I have a feeling there's still more to learn, right? What other gems of wisdom does the lesson plan have in store for us?
Well, the lesson plan doesn't stop at the basics, right? It goes deeper into areas that really separate the casual user from the true Active Directory expert.
Ooh, okay, all right. I'm ready to become an expert. Let's do this.
All right. So, for example, remember those group policy objects, or GPOs, we mentioned earlier?
Yeah.
They're incredibly powerful tools for managing configurations and security settings across your entire network.
Yeah, we talked about backing them up.
Right.
But I'm still a bit fuzzy on what they actually do. It sounds like we're moving beyond individual users and permissions now.
Yes.
And into the realm of network-wide control.
Exactly. With GPOs, you can do things like enforce password complexity rules, restrict access to certain websites, or even automatically install software on users' computers. It's all about centralizing control and ensuring consistency across your entire environment.
Wow, that's a lot of power.
Yeah.
But with great power comes great responsibility, right?
Always.
I imagine there's a lot that can go wrong if GPOs aren't configured correctly.
That's why the lesson plan emphasizes the importance of careful planning and testing.
Right.
You don't want to accidentally apply a GPO that locks users out of their accounts or disables critical applications.
No, that'd be bad.
Yeah, it's crucial to have a thorough understanding of how GPOs work and to test them in a controlled environment before deploying them network-wide.
Makes sense. It's like running a simulation before launching a rocket into space.
Yeah. Good analogy.
You want to make sure everything is working perfectly before you commit.
Exactly. And speaking of simulations and testing, the lesson plan also introduces the concept of test environments.
Yeah.
These are separate Active Directory domains where you can experiment with configurations and changes without affecting your live production environment.
Oh, that's a brilliant idea. It's like having a sandbox where you can play around with different settings and see what happens without breaking anything important.
Precisely, yeah. It allows you to be more adventurous with your configurations, try out new features, and hone your skills without the risk of disrupting your users or causing downtime.
I can see how that would be invaluable for learning and for peace of mind.
Yeah.
You can experiment freely knowing that you have a safety net if something goes wrong.
Exactly. And speaking of safety nets, the lesson plan also dives into some essential troubleshooting techniques. We've already talked about how understanding SIDs and UPNs and other user identifiers can help you diagnose problems, but there are other tools and techniques that every Active Directory administrator should have in their arsenal.
Like what? Give us some examples.
Well, the lesson plan introduces the event viewer,
Okay.
which is a powerful tool that logs events and errors that occur within your Active Directory environment. By analyzing these logs, you can often pinpoint the root cause of problems and find solutions.
So it's like a detective's notebook filled with filled with clues about what's been happening on the network.
Exactly. And there are other specialized command line tools that can help you troubleshoot specific issues like problems with replication or DNS resolution.
It sounds like troubleshooting an Active Directory is a bit like being a detective.
Yeah.
You need to gather evidence, analyze clues, and use your knowledge of the system to piece together what happened.
That's a great way to put it. And just like a good detective, you need to be organized and methodical in your approach. That's why the lesson plan stresses the importance of documenting your troubleshooting steps.
Right, right. If you solve a tricky problem, you want to record the solution so you don't have to reinvent the wheel the next time it happens.
Exactly. And it's not just for your own benefit. Clear documentation can help other members of your team troubleshoot problems more effectively, reducing downtime and improving overall efficiency.
I'm starting to understand why Active Directory administration is considered such a specialized area of IT.
Yeah.
It's not just about knowing how to create users and reset passwords.
Right.
It's about understanding the complex interplay of users, groups, permissions, policies, and technologies that make up a modern network infrastructure.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. It's a challenging and rewarding field, and one that requires continuous learning and skill development. But with the right resources and guidance, anyone can master the art of Active Directory administration.
Well, I have to say, I feel a lot more confident about tackling Active Directory challenges now. We've gone from Active Directory newbies to, well, maybe not quite experts, but definitely a lot more informed and prepared. We've explored the structure of OUs, the intricacies of user management, the power of GPOs, the importance of security and best practices, and even dipped our toes into the deeper waters of troubleshooting and advanced techniques. It's been quite a journey.
It has. And remember, the learning doesn't stop here.
Right.
Active Directory is a constantly evolving technology. So stay curious, keep experimenting, and never stop seeking out new knowledge and skills.
Great advice. So to wrap things up, we've taken a deep dive into the world of Active Directory, exploring everything from the basics to some more advanced concepts. We've learned how to design OU structures, manage users and groups, delegate permissions, implement GPOs, troubleshoot problems, and protect our directory infrastructure with backups and documentation. I hope you found it as insightful and empowering as I did. Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep those digital kingdoms organized and secure.